our witnesses for being here today. There are those who argue that with the threat from great power competition, that we ought to be reducing our interests in the Middle East and Afghanistan. There are those that argue that one reason to withdraw troops from Afghanistan was so we could better focus on the threat from China and Russia and the future great power competition and refocus on Asia. Can you address this a little bit in your opening statement, Ms. Resnick, but can you make the case for why it's important for us to continue to be engaged in the Middle East and that security cooperation is one of the important aspects of that?
Thank you for your question, Senator. As I said in my opening statement, the strategic competition, we are clear-eyed about what strategic competition means. And we understand that China is the pacing threat. But China is looking to undercut our security relationships throughout the world. And we are only as strong as our partners and alliances, as the strength of our partners and alliances. We're facing global challenges, including COVID, including climate change, including risks of terrorism. And we need partners to be able to confront those challenges. The U.S. remains the partner of choice in the region, and with our partners, we're looking to reinforce the rules-based international order. China does not provide them that kind of security. And so we will continue to look to build partnerships and alliances in the Middle East to make sure that we can respond to these global challenges with our partners and allies.
Thank you. Ms. Stroll, one of the places where we've seen the proxy war playing out is in Syria. I very much appreciated your leadership as co-chair of the Syria Study Group. As someone who worked on that legislation, I was really hopeful that the recommendations that the group came up with could make a difference in Syria. Can you talk about what, if any, of those recommendations have been implemented by the Biden administration and what you see going forward to address Syria?
Thank you for that question, Senator. First of all, one of the key recommendations of the Syria Study Group was that we should retain our U.S. military presence in northeast Syria, both because ISIS is not defeated, because we made commitments to the Syrian Democratic Forces that they continue to fight ISIS, but cannot do that without our support, training, and advice, and because there are tens of thousands of ISIS detainees still under SDF custody, as well as families of ISIS fighters at the Al-Hol IDP camp. We provide, through security cooperation authorities and funding, support and training so that there's a humane and humanitarian approach to the families and children while we facilitate relocation to the countries of origin of those foreign fighters and facilitate long-term solutions to the Syrian and Iraqi detainees. So first of all, for retaining U.S. military presence, the Biden administration is committed to retaining U.S. military presence in northeast Syria. It is also committing to addressing the humanitarian crisis. That is another priority that the Syria Study Group sought to shine light on, is the humanitarian crisis. With the Biden administration, we have not only increased our humanitarian aid to not just northeast Syria, but the rest of Syrian civilians in need. And we have restored stabilization assistance. So areas that were liberated from ISIS have the opportunity to rebuild and are no longer vulnerable to ISIS influence.
Ms. Stroll, I would encourage you to engage with the Syrian diaspora in this country, which have very definite ideas about what might be helpful in Syria and still have a lot of connections and relatives there. Also, has there been a detainee coordinator appointed yet? It's one of the things that we prescribed in the NDAA several years ago, as you know, and to my knowledge, it was never done under the previous administration.
It's a critical question. With respect to the coordinator for the detainee issue, right now, the lead for that is the Counterterrorism Bureau in the State Department. And this reflects back on what both Daz Resnick and I talked about, which is a whole of government approach. When it comes to either security assistance or security cooperation, DOD does not operate in a vacuum, nor does the State Department. In terms of engagement with the Syrian diaspora community, she and I both are in constant contact with our colleagues in the NEA Bureau across the State Department, others within the Department of Defense, as well as the National Security Council. I am confident that that engagement is taking place, but I will take that recommendation back. And when it comes to the detainee coordinator, Right now, we have not only flagged your interest in this and the fact that there is pending legislation. Right now, the lead for that is in the Counterterrorism Bureau, and they are actively involved in the diplomacy of getting countries of origin to take back both their fighters and the families, and DoD facilitates that when requested to do so.
Well, the legislation isn't actually pending, it's been passed. And so I would hope that that coordinator gets appointed to help with that issue, which is very real, as you know. Mr. Chairman, can I ask one more question? The chairman mentioned in his opening comments the Lebanese armed forces and the situation in Lebanon, which is sadly close to a failed state at this point. But one of the things that we know we need to do is continue to support the Lebanese armed forces. I was very distressed recently to hear from someone in the Middle East that, in fact, they're having trouble getting food in the LAF that they need given the current crisis. So can you talk about why it's important for us to continue to support them, even though I would agree with the chairman that security may not be their number one challenge at this point, but certainly making sure that the institution of the LAF remains strong is really critical for the future of the country.
Thank you, Senator, for the question and for your leadership on this issue. The LAF is one of our most capable partners in the Middle East. Our support for the LAF supports our broader policy on pushing back on ISIS and promoting stability. Lebanon has faced multiple crises in the last year, as we all have, but it is particularly acute in Lebanon between COVID, political paralysis, economic collapse, societal distress. Of course, the port explosion, which exacerbated everything. The LAF is really the sole legitimate defender of Lebanese sovereignty, the sole legitimate defender of the Lebanese people. And they serve as an institutional counterweight to Hezbollah, which continues to put Israelis and Lebanese at risk with their irresponsible rocket attacks, which we condemn wholeheartedly. They continue to jeopardize, Hezbollah continues to jeopardize Lebanese stability and sovereignty. Without the LAF, Hezbollah fills the void, and that is exactly the opposite of what we would like to see in Lebanon.
Thank you both very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the additional time.
Thank you. Senator Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as the United States reduces